Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Good morning. It is 8:06 on a busy Monday morning, as if there's any other kind of Monday morning in Washington, D.C. We're doing our best to keep a smile on your face, and we're charging through it. Coming up at 8:35, Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter at the Daily Wire. He'll tell us about the debate over DOGE pushing to make federal workers return to work. Kind of a big issue in this area. I'm Julie Gunlock alongside Hans von Spakovsky. Good morning, Hans.
Yeah, good morning, Julie.
So joining us now is Zack Smith. I think he's your colleague.
He is my colleague at the Heritage Foundation. I can admit to knowing him.
Senior legal fellow and manager of the Supreme Court and Appellate Advocacy program at the Heritage Foundation. Good morning, Zack.
Good morning, Julie. Thanks for having me on.
Well, look, this is an amazing story that you've been covering about fare evasion in the city. This is a fancy way to say that there are a bunch of cheapskate people, thieves in D.C. who aren't paying to take the metro or the bus. But this is a huge problem. Just how big is this problem, Zack?
Yeah, it's absolutely astronomical. And you know what's so sad about this entire thing, Julie, is it all could have been avoided. But a couple of years ago, the radical leftists on the D.C. City Council decided that they wanted to, quote, decriminalize fare evasion, basically not hold people accountable when they broke the law and didn't pay the fare to either ride the metro or ride the bus or take advantage of the other services that WMAL provides. Well, it just came out last week that it turns out about 70% of the people who are riding the metro bus right now aren't paying their fares. And that's led to millions and millions of dollars of losses for Metro Bus. I think last year the estimate was that Metro lost about $50 million due to fare evasion, which is absolutely absurd when you stop and think about it. But until the D.C. authorities, until Virginia and Maryland authorities get serious about combating this problem, it'll continue to get worse.
Yeah, and it's not just D.C. taxpayers that are subsidizing this. As you said, it's folks in Maryland, Virginia, too, because all of them subsidize the metro system. But, Zack, isn't this a sign of another problem? I seem to recall that when Rudy Giuliani became mayor of New York and used the broken windows theory to make New York a safe place again, one of the signs of high crimes were smaller misdemeanor crimes, and fare evasion, fare jumping was one of the indicators that if you're going to allow that, then more serious crimes would also take place in those areas.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Hans. Look, anyone who's worked in law enforcement as either a police officer or a prosecutor will tell you that often the way very big cases are made often start with enforcing very small offenses like traffic offenses or other fare evasion offenses, those types of things, because if someone is willing to break the law in a small way, often they're willing to break the law in a much larger way. And so if you enforce fare evasion, not always, but many times, you may find someone who has an outstanding warrant. You may find someone who's illegally possessing a handgun. You may find someone who is illegally possessing narcotics. And so those types of offenses never would have been discovered if someone hadn't been willing to enforce the fare evasion laws that are on the books. The other thing to keep in mind as well, Hans, is that if someone is willing to break the law to get into the metro system, they're often willing to break the law while they are in the metro system. And so the increases in crimes that we've seen from riders of the metro rail, from riders of metro bus, that is often attributable to individuals who didn't pay the fare to take advantage of those services in the first place. And so it just goes to show at the end of the day that this idea that there's certain laws that cannot be enforced without harming public safety, that's just nonsense.
Let me ask you, have you talked to anybody within the sort of Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Force? How do they feel about having to enforce this? I just noticed a quote. I think you wrote this article that I'm reading from. You quote Randy Clark, who's the general manager for the Washington Area Metropolitan Transit Agency. He told WTOP on Thursday, we're not interested in arrests. The less citations and less arrests, that's success for us. We just want people to pay their fair share. That seems a little confusing to me. Do they want? I mean, it seems like people might start paying their fair share if they're going to face a citation or an arrest. But are the police getting a mixed message here? Should they give citations? Should they arrest? Or shouldn't they? I just don't understand the messaging here.
Yeah, they absolutely should enforce the laws. And you're right. I think, unfortunately, the WMAL general manager, Randy Clark, he's talking a little bit out of both sides of his mouth when he says something like that. Because obviously, how do you think enforcing the fair laws that are on the book, how's that going to happen if you don't issue citations or make arrests? And so what we've seen, there was a push initially to just issue civil citations to individuals who are evading the fares. That essentially means you get like a ticket and you have to pay it. If you don't pay it, you're supposed to show up to court. But often if someone wasn't paying those civil citations, nothing was really happening. And so what needs to happen is that if someone is repeatedly breaking the law by evading the fares, then police officers need to have the authority and the backing of the governments that fund WMATA to do their jobs and arrest someone in an appropriate circumstance. Now, look, this doesn't mean everyone has to be arrested. Officers are free to use their discretion, but certainly if it's an appropriate case, then that needs to be an option that's on the table. And unfortunately, right now, I think most officers on the street feel like that if they were to do their job in an appropriate way, make arrests for people who are evading the fares, then likely the elected leaders in these jurisdictions would not back them up at the end of the day.
You know, it's just, I swear, Julie, Zach, it's just another sign of how badly the District of Columbia is run.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be one of the worst run, worst managed cities in the entire country, and this is just more of that.
Well, you know what's even worse, Hans, in some ways, is that WMATA, I think everyone who lives in the district or the DMV area knows, is facing significant budget shortfalls over the next several years. And so they're going back to Maryland, Virginia, the district, with their handout asking for significantly more money. And to see them asking for more money when they can't even do the basic blocking and tackling of collecting the money that they're currently owed, I think is very, very problematic. And so I certainly hope that Virginia officials, Maryland officials, even district officials, although I doubt it, will hold WMATA and its leaders accountable before just writing them another blank check to fill those very significant budget shortfalls that they're expecting.
Yeah, it sounds like they ought to deduct $50 million from any request for money that they're getting from
At
D.C.
least.
You know, I can't help but also think of the Daniel Penny case up in New York that occurred in a metro. And I do think there are a certain number of people who are afraid to use the metro. And this kind of police presence and getting people to realize that they have got to follow the rules also may lead, you talk about the broken window theory, it may lead to a safer metro as well, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And look, I don't know if you saw the story just yesterday. There was a fare evader at one of the metro stations. He tried to jump the fare gate. He ended up falling in between essentially the retaining wall at the platform, ended up getting hurt significantly. It took a lot of time and resources to extricate him. Fortunately, it looks like he's going to be okay. But I think, again, it goes to show that whenever someone is willing to try to not pay their fare, whenever they're willing to break the law in that seemingly small way, it's actually not so small because they're willing to commit other crimes once they're on the metro. Right. And I think many people are certainly hesitant to intervene in the district, in many of the Virginia jurisdictions, in Maryland as well, for fear that they themselves won't be supported if and when something goes wrong.
Zack, thanks so much for following this issue, and I hope you'll come back and update us. This is really fascinating. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show this morning.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Just going to let this play a little bit. Love that song. Hans, did you see Trump in France over the weekend?
Yeah, he was being treated as if he's the current president.
He kind of is. It was pretty amazing seeing him arrive at Notre Dame. This, of course, was the reopening ceremony for the cathedral, which had burned down, was terribly damaged.
Right.
And so they sort of redid all of Notre Dame, and they had this big reopening ceremony with, all the glitz and glamour of all the world leaders and royalty attending. What was very funny to see was President-elect Trump wasn't only treated like a head of state, and I mean, it really made people question where in the heck is Joe Biden, but Jill Biden attended on behalf of her husband, and was slightly awkward. They had to sit almost right next to each other.
Right.
I think Macron sat in between, but for a while Macron was not there. President of France wasn't there. And so Trump and Jill had a nice little conversation, and some photos went viral from that interaction.
Yeah, although it's not that unusual, given a lot of people have been wondering whether Joe Biden has been unofficially the acting president ever since we started seeing the kind of infirmities of that Joe Biden has been displaying ever since the debate.
Well, and she did also. There have been questions as to whether she voted for Trump. She, remember, on Election Day, she exited the White House wearing an all red suit, and so I'll just say there's video from last night's Kennedy Center Awards. And Jill Biden walks right past Kamala, does not look at her, does not speak to her, takes her seat right next to Kamala. But again, no interaction. So I'm not surprised that she's being a little friendlier towards Trump. What had me dying yesterday was that Trump used the photo of he and Jill Biden in a cologne ad. I guess he's selling cologne now. And he basically said, essentially, even your enemies will be irresistible, even to your enemies. He's a smart businessman.
But he's a smart businessman, and that's so Trumpian, isn't it? Is that going to become a phrase? That's going to become a phrase, isn't it? We're going to see that in a future dictionary. What Trumpian means.
It really was interesting, though, to see him with Macron. He met Prince William.
Right.
He met the Ukrainian President Zelensky. And I will tell you, boy, they looked happy to see him. He was.
Well, let me tell you, Julie, the interest of the international community in this election was greater than I've seen in my whole time in Washington. I tend to brief a lot of foreign delegations coming into town about election issues. We had more foreign delegations this year than I've ever seen before.
Really?
Yeah, and they all wanted to know, what will Trump be like if he wins?
Wow. Well, we've got much more to get to right now. It is 8:20 on WMAL. Glad we're doing this story later in the day after the kids have all gone to school. This is a horrible story. Jay-Z is now, his real name is Sean Carter. He has been accused in a civil lawsuit of raping a 13-year-old girl in 2000 alongside Sean Diddy Combs. This is just a pretty horrible situation here that seems to be getting worse and worse.
The whole music industry, Hollywood, it's like we've had these kind of scandals since Hollywood started, since the music industry started. It never seems to get better. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and rap. Now add rap to the rock and roll. It causes such problems. Obviously, you're innocent until proven guilty, but this is just one more scandal on top of so many. Yeah,
and you look at the entertainment industry and how they have aligned themselves with the left.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. So I should say that Sean Carter, Jay-Z, has called the allegations idiotic. He made a lengthy statement on Sunday evening alleging Busby, which is one of the lawyers who filed this lawsuit, is engaged in unprofessional behavior. He said, "These allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whomever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. Would you not agree?" He said that in a statement to NBC News. Again, these are not. This is an anonymous. The person who filed this has remained anonymous. But again, this is serious. Federal prosecutors in New York criminally charged Sean Combs in September with racketeering, sex trafficking, and other offenses. He's behind bars at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center. He was denied bail, and his trial is scheduled for May 5th. So this is going to get likely more and more ugly.
Yeah, but I have to say, he does have a point. Why is it a civil action that's been filed? Why were no criminal charges filed? That always raises doubts in my mind about the legitimacy, credibility of a particular claim.
I agree. Listen, stay tuned. We're going to talk to Luke Rosiak about DOGE pushing federal workers to return to work. Stay tuned. It's 8:29.
WMAL FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.
News now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Good morning. It is 8:37. If you missed any of this broadcast, check out our podcast on our website. We're doing our best to keep a smile on your face, and we're charging through it. I am Julie Gunlock, sitting in for Larry alongside Hans von Spakovsky. Good morning, Hans.
Good morning, Julie. I made it into the last half hour, didn't I?
I love how you kind of act like you're just surviving a tough morning. Joining us now is our friend Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter at the Daily Wire. Good morning, Luke.
Good morning.
So you have a story out. You're writing about DOGE is pushing to make federal workers return to work. Look, Luke, I have worked from home for years. I know I just was on Twitter, and one of our listeners was saying how helpful it is for him and his family to work from home. It's popular to work from home, but through your writing and your investigation, you found some pretty alarming numbers about work from the sort of work from home arrangements in the federal government. Tell us about that.
Yes, Senator Joni Ernst, who's chairwoman of the DOGE caucus in the Senate, put out this report working with inspectors general to look at how the federal government is working from home. And she basically found that they can't make up their mind. They're maintaining all these buildings. They're spending $16 billion a year maintaining these headquarters. But at the same time, almost everybody's working from home. So these buildings have an occupancy rate of 12%. The Social Security Administration recently renovated its building for $120 million. The building is 91% empty.
Gosh.
And they just signed a contract with the union locking in telework until 2029. So I work from home too. I think it can be good for a lot of people, but it doesn't really make sense to do both of these things, to spend all this money maintaining headquarters and then not having anyone use them. And then there's also a lot of evidence in this report that while in the private sector people may work from home in certain jobs just fine, the government doesn't always operate that way. There's a lot of people that may be slacking off, and there's no real oversight. And there's no, profit incentives. The mechanisms are different in the government that make it a little easier for people to get away with kind of not doing anything when they work from home. Whereas in the private sector, you may be able to work from home just fine, and if you're not, your boss is going to know it and he's going to fire you.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't show the productivity in the private sector, you're not going to keep that job. Whereas as a former federal employee in two different federal agencies, I think everybody knows once you're a career civil servant, you can basically not do your job. You can engage in the just worst things, and the chances of you're getting fired are pretty much nil. It's almost impossible to fire someone, even when you know they're not competent at their job.
Yeah, I mean, there was a guy at Social Security Administration who, for 3 years, he was running a home inspection business while he was working for Social Security remotely. So he was out in the field going to everybody's houses, And he would just have his mom send an email once in a while from his Social Security account, and that was enough to make people think that he was working full time. And meanwhile, you've got Social Security, elderly and disabled people having a hard time getting services sometimes. And so Joni Ernst is suggesting that maybe this is why. And she goes through a lot of metrics where the government is not serving people well. You fire off an email to some government bureaucrat and you don't hear back for 2 months. Is that because they're not really working that hard when they're working remotely? Because something's got to explain why it takes two months to get a return email. A couple other examples of just how crazy it is to maintain all these buildings. The head of the General Services Administration, whose job it is to maintain all these buildings, works from home. And then the EPA, whose job it is to make sure we have safe drinking water, its own drinking water in its own headquarters was actually poisonous because it was just sitting stagnant in the pipes for so long.
Well, Luke,
then finally you have FDA inspectors inspecting food facilities over video chat. So it really raises the question of whether we're putting government employees' convenience over American safety when it comes to getting these services that presumably they think are important, because that's why we have these agencies.
Well, I think that there is a case to be made here, despite being a big fan of work from home. And part of the reason is I think that it makes it a lot easier. Women in particular really prefer to have more flexibility in the workforce. And I think that work from home options really are good, and it really attracts women back into if they choose to. But for me, I was able to work and also stay home with my kids, and that was only possible because of work from home. But how much of an appetite will there be on Capitol Hill to really look into this? I remember Matthew Foldy, friend of the show, doing a big investigation right after COVID, where he would go up on Capitol Hill, and it was obvious that these senators and congressmen had not been to their offices for months. There was mail piled up outside. And so, congressmen and senators also enjoy these arrangements. How much of an appetite will there be for some of these DOGE initiatives when it might hurt them as well?
Well, I think that, the people that are public, I think Congress is back. I think that the high-level employees are back. But there's this weird thing where, the VA advertises on its website, at the VA you can break away from the traditional 9-to-5, 40-hour work week without sacrificing the opportunities and benefits that come with job security. So they're saying you're going to have the pension, you're going to have the difficulty to fire me, but I also don't have to come into work, and I don't even have to work 40 hours a week. And normally that was the trade-off, is you do get the pension, but you do have to show up and sit in the office. And, at the VA, there was a suicide hotline that a third of the calls were just not being answered. So these are potentially life-threatening. The fact that if these employees aren't working that hard, people could die.
Yeah.
And so, another thing is during COVID, the government actually hasn't tracked remote workers they haven't put much effort into making sure they're actually working. One of the times they did it was during the pandemic. The Health and Human Services Department looked, and only a third of the remote employees were even logging into their email on a typical day. And so this is during COVID. And so it's like, well, if you guys are the health department and we have this pandemic, I mean, do you guys even think your agency is that important? Do you guys even think your job is essential? Because it's essentially fraud. And the fact that nobody noticed they didn't log in at all, even though remote work, I think, works out very well for a lot of people, that just can't be tolerated. I agree with you about the woman angle, but one woman, I think, who is going to be happy if Elon Musk and Donald Trump bring all these people back is Muriel Bowser. It's gonna really resurrect the economy of DC.
Maybe then they'll start paying for Metro. Luke, we gotta keep it there. This is great reporting. I hope you'll come back and update on this really important issue for this region.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. It's 8:44 on WMAL.
WMAL, making sense of the roads, because traffic doesn't always follow the pattern. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
Well, we know that the Biden White House likes to, and campaign, was very big into mimicking Trump ideas. Remember the no tax on tips?
Right.
Right. Well, now it appears that they are rushing to ban food colorings in food items before the term ends. This, of course, is something first talked about by RFK and endorsed, essentially, by Donald Trump by making RFK his HHS secretary. So it looks like Biden is now in full-blown legacy mode and wants to take credit for some of these things that are very popular with the American public.
Yeah, he can try that, but legacy mode, I think what people are going to remember most strongly is that he pardoned his son.
Yes.
And put himself and his family above the law. I just don't think die and foods. I don't think anybody's going to remember that. They're going to remember the pardon he gave his son.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I wonder how many more of these things that we'll see, these sort of last minute scrambling to take credit. We've seen, I mean, it was pretty astonishing this weekend to see Biden sort of surrogates out there saying the fall of Syria is because of Biden and it's all great and everything that's, happening right now. We're going to have a new regime in Syria that's, ISIS, but whatever. It's all because of Biden. They're already doing that. So I suspect we'll see more attempts like this the next couple weeks.
I think we are, but it's like they're in a lifeboat on the ocean that's full of holes and they're bailing water out, trying to get the water out before the lifeboat sinks, but the boat's going to sink.
Yeah, I think you're right. They'll remember the pardon, but I also think that they will remember how cognitively impaired he was. Yes. And that really is the legacy. It'll be interesting to see what kind of presidential library is going to come out of this this legacy. I don't think much of one. There's more to come. Right now it's 8:51 on O'Connor and Company. Hans, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Well, thanks for having me, and I think I'm going to be back tomorrow.
Yes, you are. You are. Chris, what do you got for us today?
That's pretty good. I don't know. Well, we were just talking about wars around the world in Syria and all this stuff, and the biggest, deadliest wars that nobody cares about. The deadliest wars in the world. There's not a thing to worry about. We got that. And President Trump yesterday, big interview, Face the Meat, and they got. But he talked about a whole lot of stuff, and we've got a lot of great stuff on that too, President Trump. And our news media friends, aren't they hilarious? They are just
always.
They are something. The most corrupt institution in America, the fourth estate, the United States of America. See, there's John Matthews waving at us from over there. See? Not everybody, John. It's just institutionally the broader picture. What did you guys have fun with today?
Oh gosh, about a lot of stuff. We did talk about What'd you say?
Face the meat. Yeah,
there
face the meat. Face the meat. There it is. Yeah, so we got that President Trump, war mayhem, Bashar al